My mom and dad were married in Michigan and divorced when I was 2. So I really don't know my parents to have had a relationship together, but they were really good co-parents. And then when I turned probably around 12 or 13 years old, my mom graduated from X-ray school and we moved to Texas for work. I found myself being very alone in the beginning, especially through middle school. But we made it, and I don't think you could pay me to go back now. I graduated high school in '99, and I wanted to be a police officer. I'm not quite sure what motivated me to go down that route. I've always been kind of a square, never been a rule pusher or breaker, so it was just kind of a fit for me.
In 2002, 21-year-old Amanda Siggers is in her second year studying criminal justice at San Jacinto College in Houston, Texas.
I was a young girl that had the world at my fingertips, really. I was having a decent time with my friends, exploring the city and just living life. One day, a friend and I were preparing for a test, and we chose to go to a local bookstore, coffee shop, and study. We happened to look over, and there was this guy sitting at an adjacent table. He was very handsome. After a while, conversation ensued with him.
25-year-old Cy Ghosh tells Amanda and her friend that he works as a pharmaceutical sales rep, but intends to go back to school.
Cy had told me that he graduated from UT with a pre-med degree. He applied to get into Baylor College of Medicine, and he was accepted, but he denied the acceptance and ended up venturing into something else. He eventually got both of our phone numbers, and I thought for sure he was going to call her, but he ended up calling me, and I was ecstatic. The beginning of our relationship was very fun. So I was very much a gentleman from the word go, and he really just laid out the red carpet.
He was very, very polite, very cordial, pretty much like Amanda had told me. He was a tall, handsome man, and I knew that she was, she was very smitten.
Culturally, he was very different from me. I found him to be very interesting. Even though he was raised here in the United States, he had a lot of Eastern values. His parents were first-generation Indians. I got to learn a lot about the temples and just the peaceful nature of Hinduism. It's such a beautiful culture. He told me that his father and mother were divorced, and prior to us getting together, he had moved out of his father's home and into his mother's home. He was very uncomfortable at his mother's house. She would consistently be on him, nagging him about something, mostly his career, because in that culture, career and education is #1. They generally live in the home for quite some time, even after college, in an effort to save as much money as possible. And so he was, staying in the house even at an older age because that's culturally just what was of the norm for them. Cy's mother's name is Lipika. She was very much about money, prestige. She didn't care for the union between Cy and I. He relayed that message to me, and I feel like she wanted him to marry an Indian woman and not a white woman. But we chose to look past it. 3 months later, she realized that he was serious about me because he actually brought me home, and we ended up staying the night there. And she opened up the door, and I was there. She shut the door very fast, and Cy had to go put that fire out. She was very vocal about me being a white bitch, and she didn't want that white bitch staying the night in her house. It was certainly a shock, but I knew that he wasn't going to listen to that. I knew how he felt about me, but it was very hurtful. We ended up leaving, and I don't believe I ever stayed the night there again.
Cy's dad, on the other hand, welcomes Amanda with open arms.
Cy's father, his name is Biz. I did not feel like he was racially against me or us being together. I felt like he genuinely wanted to see us succeed in life. He was just a very kind soul.
In late 2002, Biz asks his son and Amanda to come live with him and his current wife, Kay. He has been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wants to spend his last days with his son.
The first few weeks were good. Kay was on board with everything. She knew that we were there to help and not to hinder. But then it started to decline. I could tell that there was tension between Kay and Cy. Cy went on to tell me that Kay would say false things about him. Eventually, it felt like I was walking on eggshells everywhere I went. One evening, Kay cornered me. She said, "You have no idea the person that you're getting involved with. You have no idea who he is, and I would highly encourage you to stay away." At the time, I thought, whatever, I'm in love, and he's so good to me, and he has nothing good to say about her, so it tainted my ability to really take her seriously.
Despite the tension, all three focus on caring for Biz. Until his death in July of 2003, Cy is inconsolable.
He was devastated. Biz was a primary force in his life. And once he passed, I think that Cy felt empty. I think he felt scared. Very different, mentally very different.
Things come to a head when Amanda finds something suspicious in Cy's car.
I found a box of condoms, and it prompted a lot of questions. He became defensive, and it led to a horrific argument, and I started to get a little bit scared. And I had attempted to make a phone call, and he ripped the phone out of the wall. So I made my way to the front door, and I pushed the panic button on the alarm, which immediately sends a call to 911. So I knew that they were on the way, and he knew they were on the way as well, and he left. So the police showed up, and I let them know what had transpired. I did not press charges. It was hours later that he came back, and I vividly remember just being so upset that he was gone, not knowing what was going to transpire, if we were breaking up.
Cy begs Amanda's forgiveness, and Amanda rationalizes that he is deeply grieving and not acting like himself.
I forgave him, and we just chose to ultimately put it behind us. I had a lot of big hopes for our relationship, and I wanted things to be normal again. So I just made it okay. And we were fine. We were fine after that.
In 2005, Amanda and Cy decide to take the next big step.
I was very happy for my daughter to get married. She was very happy about getting married.
And by this time, Cy's mom has accepted Amanda into her son's life.
So we had a Hindu ceremony at the Meenakshi temple, and 2 days later we had the Christian ceremony. My family came to the Hindu ceremony. I had to wear a red sari, red and gold. It was absolutely beautiful.
The highlight was when I saw them walking towards the limousine to spend the rest of their lives together. That's the way it was supposed to work.
I felt like my dreams were coming true. We were in forward motion.
Cy applies to medical school, and life seems on track. Until he does an about-face and pressures Amanda to change her career.
It came out of left field for sure. He was very adamant that being a police officer, that was a blue-collar job. It wasn't acceptable to him or his family, and he made it very clear that it was not where he saw his life going.
Instead, he wants her to go into healthcare as well.
I was to go through nursing school, and we were going to open and run a practice together. In theory, it was the fairy tale. I caved in because I felt like he knew better than I did. He was 5 years older than me, and he had a plan.
Cy chooses a podiatry school in Des Moines, Iowa, and Amanda gets accepted into a nearby nursing school.
When they moved to Iowa, they were about 10 hours closer to Michigan, I think, so I could see them more often. I would take the train over. help her decorate. And I love doing it. As a father, it was great for me to be able to do that.
But Amanda doesn't adapt well to her new field of study.
Well, I was in a clinical setting one day, and I ended up passing out. And that's when my professor pulled me to the side and said, you know, you may want to rethink your career choice.
She said, Dad, I really want to do it. But she knew that she couldn't do it because she couldn't stay on the side of blood, so.
Amanda decides to withdraw from the program.
When I told Cy, he didn't react well. He made it very clear that he was embarrassed by my decision. He told me he was very disappointed and that I needed to do it. I stood my ground, that I wanted to do something else. And ultimately, he had called me white trash and bitch and wished that I was dead. That's when I realized that I had made a mistake.
When Amanda Ghosh quits nursing school, her husband Cy becomes verbally abusive.
But I'm a loyal soul. I'm very loyal to my mate. And I chose to stay. I didn't think that there wasn't anything that we couldn't fix. I took my vows, my marriage vows, very seriously.
Amanda forges ahead despite Cy's disapproval.
I took all of my criminal justice and nursing courses and wrapped it into a general studies degree, basically the highest level associate degree you can get from a junior college, and I moved on. But I didn't feel proud of that accomplishment, actually. Cy belittled me because it wasn't good enough, and so I felt like a failure.
And I felt that there was things going on that I didn't know about, which relayed into their marriage some friction.
He definitely made me feel devalued. I felt alone. I felt isolated. I missed my family.
And then, a call from out of the blue brings family directly into Amanda's life in an unexpected way.
Amber was my half-sister. She was born to my dad and my stepmom, Joyce. She was 4 years younger than me, almost to the day. The only sister I've ever had. And as she got older, she became dependent on drugs. We went our separate ways.
While struggling with addiction, 21-year-old Amber gives birth to a baby girl, Kelsey. When Kelsey is a few months old, Amber is ordered by a Michigan judge to enter rehab for 90 days.
The paternity had not been established on Kelsey. And I received a phone call from CPS asking me if I would be interested in doing a temporary foster placement for my niece. It was a no-brainer for me, but I wanted to make sure it was okay with Cy to bring her into the home, and he agreed.
In January of 2007, Amanda travels to Michigan to get her niece.
When I first saw Kelsey, she was only 11 pounds at 7 months old. I knew instantly that I was never going to give her back.
Amber was not capable of taking care of a child, but Amanda was, so I was happy that Kelsey was in a safe place.
I knew that I was on the path that God had laid out for me. She was a sickly baby due to being born addicted. She cried incessantly. It is very hard to deal with a baby that never stops crying. But somehow you figure out how to deal with it.
Amber didn't finish her rehabilitation, so the court awarded Amanda to keep taking care of Kelsey.
Even though he never said it, I think Cy felt like he had made a mistake. I think he quickly realized that the responsibility of a child was far more than he anticipated. Unfortunately, it wore Cy down over time. I was doing the laundry one day and the baby was crying. I walked around the corner and he was shaking her violently. I was shocked. I couldn't believe that he was doing what he was doing to such a tiny, fragile little baby. I was just blown away. And it was in that moment that I knew I had to leave. He has absolutely crossed the line. I need to get her out of there. He didn't deserve the title of being a dad.
In May 2007, Amanda moves back to Houston with Kelsey, leaving Cy behind in Iowa.
I was gonna take care of this baby. That was my mission. Why the career choices that I had made and why it didn't pan out. I knew that I was supposed to be Kelsey's mom. I was able to find a townhouse apartment right next door to my mom, which was extremely helpful because she was able to help me with the baby. I got a part-time job so that we could survive. Somehow we made it work. All of a sudden I became a single mom. We were divorced in December of 2008. He filed for divorce and it was uncontested. It was easy, 2-page divorce. I felt like it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, but probably the best thing that could have ever happened to me at the same time. It was such a weird feeling.
Amanda enrolls in a sonography program for training in ultrasound.
I felt very confident. I found my independence. I was going to school and I was working full-time. Kelsey was going to daycare and thriving in daycare. We were happy. I was free of all of the dysfunction that I had lived in for so long.
But Amanda's newfound peace will not last for long.
So I moved back to Texas in December of 2009, early 2010. And that's when the stalking began.
I can't imagine what that would feel like to be victimized, stalked, harassed, knowing there is a weapon involved. This behavior can't go on forever. When is somebody gonna break?
Amanda Harris has moved on with her life, while Cy flounders.
Ironically enough, he decided that medical school wasn't quite right for him.
Cy drops out of podiatry, converts to Christianity, and returns to Houston.
One day he called me and told me that he had obtained a job at a pizza place near my apartment. And I thought, why in the world would he take a job delivering pizzas? And then it dawned on me that he could drive in and out of my apartment complex on the daily, on the hourly sometimes. I found it to be bizarre behavior.
He's a pizza delivery driver. Where being a law enforcement officer wasn't good enough for her, now he's going to drive and deliver pizzas, not because he wants to, but because it allows him to have the freedom to drive by and check on her whenever he wants to.
In early 2011, 2.5 years after her divorce, Amanda moves to a new home in a new neighborhood and doesn't share her address with Cy. It's a new beginning.
I was encouraged by my friends to get out there, so I put my profile up on an online dating site and I met Wayne.
Wayne Harris works in the motorsports industry and, like Amanda, is divorced with one child, a boy named Nick.
So I met up with him and he thought he was an attractive man and our conversations just flowed so well. I just knew right away. I was so ecstatic to feel this feeling again, to know that I was capable of feeling, the joy, the butterflies again. And he was as well, that we just didn't miss a beat. We decided that we were gonna see each other the very next day, which turned into the very next day and every day thereafter, unless he was out of town for work.
And I thought he's just a fantastic guy. Real nice to be around, very energetic.
So Super Bowl Sunday rolled around and Wayne came over that evening and I was cooking and I would oftentimes let Kelsey play at the park right there because I could see her. She's basically within arm's reach of me. So Kelsey's playing, Wayne and I are talking, and I get a knock at the door, and it's the police officer that lives on site. He had received a call from a concerned person letting them know that I let my child play outside unattended.
Amanda invites the officer inside to discuss it, embarrassed that her new boyfriend is a witness.
We all had conversation. Wayne had conversation with him. We were all in agreement that she was certainly within an eye shot, ear shot, arm shot of me and that she was perfectly fine. I asked the officer who had made the call, and he couldn't tell me, but I knew in my gut who was at the root of this. I felt frustrated. I felt violated again. It's a very uneasy feeling to know you're being watched. At this point, my relationship is blossoming with Wayne, and I didn't let him know everything that was going on because I certainly didn't want to taint a good relationship with my baggage and drama. I didn't want to bring that into the relationship.
Amanda's strategy is to block Cy completely.
I figured he didn't get his way. Hopefully he'll move on now, but that never happened. And he knew exactly what button to push, which was going after my daughter.
It has been 5 years since Amanda took custody of Kelsey. Now, as Amanda is on the verge of becoming Kelsey's legal mother, Cy starts to stir things up.
What he did is he cleverly went to a therapist, told the therapist all of his grievance toward me, and made me out to look like a neglectful mother. And it was her duty to call CPS by state law. I received a phone call from CPS that they were going to interview my daughter that day. I felt mortified, and as soon as she stepped foot in my door, she realized quickly that Kelsey was just fine.
I just couldn't believe that he did that. It was like, when does it stop?
Kelsey, the adopted daughter, is the reason she left him in the first place. So by calling CPS, if that worker had not done a thorough and proper investigation or had just rushed to judgment, then Amanda could have very easily lost Kelsey. And for all intents and purposes, her niece, who is now her daughter, is the most important thing she has. And it would have been devastating.
Concerned that Cy's unpredictable behavior is escalating, Amanda seeks help from the local police.
I don't think it's ever going to go away, and I honestly have no idea how to deal with it. I've gone to the police department at this point. I've talked to officers that have asked me to just ignore it, and as long as he doesn't put his hands on me, there's really nothing they can do. It's very frustrating. I felt horribly harassed, unprotected, and you feel so helpless.
Wayne steps up and asks Amanda and Kelsey to move in with him on the other side of Houston.
It was the best feeling. I felt Kelsey was going to have a great role model, a great father figure. Moving to the north side of town was good because Cy didn't know where I had gone. And so the stalking had come to a halt for a short period of time. Life was actually going really, really well.
It was very, very comforting to know that she was with somebody that was safe, and Kelsey too.
That all changes one night when Wayne is away on business.
I woke up to gunshots outside of my bedroom window. I knew he was out there.
In 2012, in the Houston suburb of Tomball, Amanda Ghosh is awakened by gunshots outside her window.
I immediately called the police.
She did not see Cy shoot the gun, but she did see him get in the car. When that happened, well, that's when I really became concerned.
When they showed up, he wasn't there. They checked the perimeter of the home. They didn't find any shell casings. They spoke with the neighbors. None of the neighbors had heard any gunshots, and so I kind of felt like they didn't believe me, and it really went nowhere.
Amanda is on high alert, and it's not long before another incident occurs.
One night, Wayne and I were sitting in the living room watching TV, and our dog ran to the window and was barking his tail off. So I knew somebody was out there, and I had a feeling that it was Cy. Wayne hopped up quite angrily, and I encouraged him to just settle down for half a second, let me call the police and get them there this time so that they could witness what was going on. They were right around the corner, so it only took a couple of minutes, and they caught him there. Thank God. This time he had finally been caught, and they issued him a trespass violation and a warning. We actually felt good after that for a while. We didn't see him for quite some time after that.
With Cy in her rear view, Amanda commits to her bright future.
We decided to get married on 12/12/12 at 12/12 at the Justice of the Peace.
They were very, very happy. And in fact, at the time that they got married, they adopted Kelsey at the same time.
I had been fighting for custody of Kelsey for the better part of 7 years. It was quite the process, but we'd finally gotten there. And then 2 days later, I found out I was pregnant for Gemma.
It was great to see. Wayne wrote notes for the unborn baby for her to read later on and, when she grows up. So he was very, very excited about being a new father.
Gemma was born with a very, very rare condition called bacterial association. She was born with only one kidney, as well as no esophagus, a cardiac defect, and a vertebral defect. Needless to say, she required 24/7 attention, care.
She was a perfect little child. Of course, all of my grandkids were perfect. They are a blessing.
About a year and a half after Gemma was born, we moved into this beautiful home that neither one of us thought we would ever be able to live in. And here we achieved it. We were on top of the world at this point. Christmas Day 2015, we woke up rather early with the kiddos because they were just super excited. And we just sat down to open our gifts, and I hear a tap at the door. And who else but Cy?
Cy tells Amanda that he would like to pray with her and her 2 daughters.
I just couldn't believe that he even came back around, especially at a time when the family's getting together for Christmas.
Wayne came unglued that day. He escorted Cy off of our property with a lot of profanity and a lot of anger and aggression.
Cy's stalking has been going on for almost 6 years, ever since Amanda decided to leave him.
There are some individuals who cannot take no for an answer. They cannot move on and regain their sense of balance until they're back in control again. Maybe if Amanda were to run back to him and he could say, "No, I don't want you," then he would have control again and he could move on. Right now, none of the decisions are his, except the ones that he uses to torture and drive them crazy.
She is aware of Texas's strong stand your ground laws and asks the police for more information about self-defense.
So I asked the officer what my rights were. If I had the right to hold him at citizen's arrest until the police got there. He told me that we definitely had that right.
Wayne owns a gun and suggests Amanda buy one too.
Wayne encouraged me to go get my license to carry and buy a weapon to protect myself due to all of this incessant harassment, stalking. So I took a few classes and tried to become as capable with my weapon as possible. June 28th, 2017 was Kelsey's 11th birthday, and she chose to just have a she day. She chose to do all kinds of things like get her nails done, get her hair done, very girly stuff.
Amanda, Kelsey, and Kelsey's friend Georgia meet up with Wayne, his son Nick, and baby Gemma at Kelsey's favorite restaurant.
And after dinner, Gemma was exhausted, so I asked Wayne to take her back home so that I could finish shopping with Kelsey and her friend for her birthday. So he obliged and reached over and gave me a kiss, a really long kiss. The kids were in the background ewing. I'll forever remember it. I stayed at the mall with Georgia and Kelsey for probably about another hour. Kelsey asked me if her friend could stay the night, and I said sure. So all 3 of us went back to our home. And as I was rounding the corner of my street, I saw Cy on his hands and knees at my front door with Wayne pointing a gun at him. I knew immediately that I needed to protect my family. I reached into my glove box, I grabbed my gun, and I told the girls to sit down and not to move. I got out of the car, I held the gun in that direction, and I called the police.
Hi, I need a police officer as soon as possible. I'm making
Hold on.
an arrest right now.
You can't make a citizen's arrest.
Yes, I've already been informed that I can. I have an ongoing case against this person.
Ma'am.
Get down! Get down!
Who is this man to you?
He is my ex-husband.
On June 28, 2017, Jennifer Provoznik is visiting friends who live down the street from where Amanda and Wayne live.
I work in law enforcement, and it's my day off, so I just wanted to really enjoy my day with my friends.
They are oblivious to the scene unfolding a couple of yards away.
My name is Amanda Harris. I've been down there many times to tell you guys what's going on. He's been told by the police to stay away many, hundreds of times.
Do you have a weapon right now?
My husband and I both have a weapon.
Okay, I'm gonna need you to put that weapon up, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, you and your husband both.
Wayne, he wants you to put your weapon down.
Does this other male have a weapon?
I have no idea.
From inside the car, 11-year-old Kelsey also calls 911.
Send him over right now, please.
What's going on?
My mom's ex-husband, he literally stalks us and he's at our house right now. My parents are yelling at him right now. It's done. I'm sorry. I'm just really scared.
For me, I'm getting hurt. You stay on the line.
And I hear 3 distinct gunshots and a woman screaming. So at this time, my training kicks in, and I told my friend, I was like, listen, call 911, I'm going down there.
I had been shot, but I didn't know it. It was all so surreal. I saw my husband fall to the ground out of the corner of my eye. And as I sat up from the position I was in, I was shot again. And I was laying between the 2 cars when I saw Sai's feet moving around the car and circle back to me. And when I looked up, he was holding a gun at my head, and he pulled the trigger. But it didn't fire. I had been saved by the grace of God. It didn't fire. And some divine force picked me up, and I got to my feet and I ran for my life.
I see a woman running into the house and slamming the door. And then there's this guy just standing there in between 2 cars, looking around, and he looks right at me and then takes off running.
Sai Ghosh gets in a car and flees the scene.
And that's when a little girl gets out of the car. She looks at me and she starts screaming, "Save my daddy." And I look down, there's a body in the driveway. And I was like, listen, I said, there's a woman behind me. You take your friend. You do not stop till you get to her. Do you understand me? And she goes, yes. And so I sent her off at that point. I look at the individual on the ground, and I knew there was no point of me even attempting CPR or any other life-saving matters.
All I could think is he's gonna fire through this door. And I realized in that moment that I had left Kelsey in the back seat of the car. I ran back out the front door, and I was met by a very kind lady.
I know that she's wounded, and she's also in shock. She's yelling about her babies being missing. She's also screaming, I knew he would do something like this. I knew it. And then she notices the man in the driveway.
She kindly grabbed me by my arm. And that's when I realized I'd been shot in my arm. And she walked me over to his body. And I was able to say goodbye to my husband. And they were putting me in an ambulance shortly thereafter.
When police arrive, they find 5-year-old Gemma and 17-year-old Nick hiding in a closet. That's when Amanda's father drops by on his way home to say happy birthday to Kelsey.
As I got out of the car, there was 3 or 4 policemen that came up to me. And the first thing they said was, Amanda's in the hospital, but she's okay. She's been shot, but she's going to be okay. And right at that point, that's when my heart just fell. And the first thing I thought of was the kids. Are the kids okay? What happened? And they said, yeah, the kids are here. They're with some of the neighbors that are here. And then I said, well, what about Wayne? That's when they continued to tell me he didn't make it.
We begin with that breaking news alert out of League City. A man police initially wanted for questioning is now wanted for murder.
We were the first news crew on the scene. We're getting there, and it's the chaos of the scene because you have a gunman on the run, you have dead body and someone seriously wounded, and everyone's trying to figure out what happened.
They put the hospital on lockdown because Cy was on the run.
I was at her bedside the whole time. I don't know, it's like a movie, a bad movie. It was a horrible nightmare.
So as this statewide manhunt is going on, police had reason to believe that Cy was going to try to run for the border. And it was a checkpoint in El Paso. They were able to identify that Cy was trying to cross. There wasn't much of a resistance. At that point, even Cy had figured out that this was over and he was going to be taken into custody. When they look inside the vehicle, they do find a gun. They find several clips with bullets inside where the casings match the 12 that were found on scene of the shooting back in Lake City.
I don't know how I made it through. I really don't. But I have children, and they needed me, and life didn't stop. I had to get out of bed every day. I had to accept that he was never coming back. Thank God for my children. I stayed in the house until the trial came, and it took us 2 years to go to trial.
As the family tries to heal, Amanda assumes the only time she will ever have to encounter Cy again is in court. But she is wrong.
Well, one day I get this phone call, and I can clearly see that it's the jail on my caller ID. So I turn on the voice recorder, and I took the phone call.
Hello?
Hello?
I just want to apologize to you. I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. I'm really sorry.
Is this a joke?
No, I just want to apologize.
You almost killed me. Is this a joke?
No, Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I got scared.
Got scared?
I could not believe that I was listening to this person on the other end of the phone. How is this even allowed? Who is running this jail and allowing a murderer to call his victim?
I just want to pray with you guys. I'll put you on the phone real quick before we go to trial. Can I pray with you? Please, Jesus, please comfort Amanda. Please help me never harm her, never to cause her problems again.
Cy's staggering ability to keep harassing Amanda will even continue through the trial itself.
So I was charged with murder in the first degree, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and stalking.
In the middle of the case, Cy fires his defense attorney and decides he's going to defend himself now.
But I know that he wanted to get me on the stand and question me, and that was his way of doing it. He was able to question me for a very long period of time.
Cy thought that Amanda was going to wilt on the stand. That's not what happened.
Amanda comes through this a hero. The fact that she does not cave, that she looks him straight in the eye and answers his questions. So if he wanted control, he didn't get it. He got to talk to her, but he didn't get the responses, the feeling, the control that he was seeking. So in that case, Amanda comes out a winner.
I don't know how the law allows your attacker to question you. How is that even possible? But it happened.
After the trial wraps up, the jury is quick to return guilty verdicts. And on March 5th, 2020, Cy is sentenced to 50 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years.
I was disappointed because I feel like he should have gotten life without the possibility of parole. I truly believe that if he were to walk the streets again, if he were to ever get out, that he will kill me. He will finish the job.
I hope he never gets out, and all I can do is just say, let Jesus take the wheel. Even though I'm that close to her, I can't imagine going through what she went through. But we get through it every day. It's a process where we're all working through it.
I was angry with the police. I feel like they failed my family, and I think Cy Ghosh is pure evil. But there's still a big life to live, and I choose to just be happy. We have what, 40? I have 40 summers left. I'm gonna make the best of the 40 summers I have left. Wayne wouldn't want me to waste them.
The fog in London during the winter of 1975 didn't just settle, it swallowed. It was a thick, yellow-gray curtain of smog and dampness that clung to the brickwork of Kensington, turning the street lamps into ghostly, indistinct orbs. On the night of November 14th, the city felt unusually hollow. The distant hum of the underground was a rhythmic heartbeat beneath the pavement, and the air tasted of coal smoke and wet wool. Inside a small, third-floor flat on Talgarth Road, 22-year-old Claire Sterling was preparing for a life that would never happen. She was an aspiring cellist, a woman whose hands were calloused from strings and whose mind was filled with the complex geometries of Bach. She was vibrant, she was loved, and in less than an hour, she would become a ghost. The transition from life to a cold case begins with a single, jarring silence. Claire had stepped out to buy a bottle of milk and a newspaper from the late-night kiosk. She never returned. The walk was supposed to take 7 minutes. It was a route she had walked 100 times, a path etched into the muscle memory of her daily routine. But that night, the fog was a predator's playground. Witnesses later recalled hearing nothing but the muffled sound of a distant car horn and the rhythmic clicking of heels on stone, until the clicking stopped. It didn't fade away, it simply ceased, as if the earth had opened up and consumed her. The morning light of November 15th didn't bring clarity. It brought horror. A dog walker, navigating the frost-covered grass of a secluded corner of Holland Park, stumbled upon a sight that would haunt him for the next 5 decades. Claire's body was positioned with a terrifying, ritualistic precision. She lay beneath an ancient oak tree, her coat neatly folded beside her, her eyes staring blankly at the canopy of gray branches. There was no sign of a struggle, no shredded clothing, no bruises on her arms to suggest she had fought back. There was only the wound, a single surgical incision across the throat, so clean it looked like a mistake of the light. The blood had pooled into the frozen earth, turning the soil into a dark, iron-scented sludge. This was the birth of a mystery that would paralyze London. The headlines the next morning were screaming, "Sensational slasher, shadow in the fog, the girl who vanished in 7 minutes." The community was gripped by a primal, suffocating fear. Doors that had never been locked were suddenly bolted. Parents clutched their children tighter. The police response was immediate, massive, and ultimately utterly futile. Detectives flooded the park, sifting through the dirt with brushes and tweezers, but the 1970s offered few tools for such a phantom. Forensics was a nascent science, a world of blood types and grainy fingerprints that often led to dead ends. They found a single item that didn't belong, a small silver cufflink shaped like a lion's head, lying inches from Claire's hand. It was an expensive piece, a mark of status, a hint that the killer wasn't a drifter from the shadows, but someone who walked among the elite. Yet, without a database, without a name, the silver lion was just a piece of metal in a plastic bag. The investigation hit a wall of silence. Thousands of men were interviewed, hundreds of leads were followed into dark alleys and smoky pubs, but the killer had evaporated with the morning mist. Claire Sterling became a photograph on a missing poster that slowly yellowed and tore, a name whispered in police precincts as a reminder of failure. For 50 years, the file sat in a basement, gathering the dust of half a century, while a monster lived a life of honor, hiding in plain sight. The weight of that silence grew heavier with every passing decade. In the mid-70s, London was a city of contradictions, vibrant culture clashing with industrial decay. For the residents of Kensington, the Sterling murder was the moment the illusion of safety shattered. Detective Inspector Marcus Thorne, the man originally assigned to the case, spent his nights staring at the crime scene photos until the ink began to fade. He obsessed over the 7-minute gap. How could a woman disappear on a busy street and reappear in a locked park without a single soul seeing the struggle? The answer, he feared, was that there was no struggle because Claire Sterling knew her killer, or at least, she trusted the uniform or the suit he wore. Thorne followed the trail of the Silver Lion cufflink to every high-end jeweler in London, every bespoke tailor in Savile Row. He found 12 sets sold in the last year, but each lead withered. One owner was in Scotland, another was a member of Parliament with a rock-solid alibi, and 3 more had lost theirs months prior. The investigation was a masterclass in frustration. The 1975 police force relied on shoe leather and informants, but the silent slasher left no whispers in the underworld. He didn't brag. He didn't return to the scene. He was a shadow who understood the geometry of the city better than the police did. As weeks turned into months, the public's demand for justice turned into a low, simmering resentment. The news cycle moved on to the next tragedy, the next strike, the next political scandal, but the ghost of Claire Sterling remained in Holland Park. Every time the fog rolled in, the local papers would run a cold case retrospective, a grim anniversary reminder of the girl with the cello who never came home. By 1980, the case was officially designated as dormant. The evidence boxes were taped shut. The Silver Lion was locked in a steel drawer. Claire's parents eventually moved away, unable to bear the sight of the kiosk where she was last seen. The flat on Talgarth Road was rented to new tenants who knew nothing of the music that once filled the rooms. The world was modernizing. The era of DNA and digital surveillance was on the horizon, but for Claire, it seemed the technology would arrive 50 years too late. Little did the city know that the killer was still there, walking the same streets, perhaps even nodding to the police officers who had once hunted him. He had integrated himself into the very fabric of the community he had traumatized. He was building a reputation for kindness, for charity, for leadership. He was the perfect citizen, a pillar of the establishment, and he carried the memory of that November night like a hidden trophy, convinced that time had finally washed his hands clean of the blood. But time is not a cleanser, it is a witness. While the world forgot, the molecules remained. Trapped in the fibers of Claire's folded coat, caught in the microscopic grooves of the Silver Lion, were the blueprints of a killer. In 1975, these were invisible, useless ghosts. But in the laboratories of the future, they were ticking time bombs. The case didn't die. It just went into hibernation, waiting for a generation of scientists who could speak the language of the dead. The nightmare that began in the fog of 1975 was about to collide with the cold, hard light of 2026, and the shock of what was hidden behind that mask of virtue would leave London reeling. The pillar was about to crack, and the truth, preserved for half a century, was finally ready to scream. As we look back at those initial 1,400 days of the failed investigation, we see a police force defeated by a man who didn't exist in their world of common thugs. They were looking for a monster in a dark alley, but the monster was in the drawing room. He was the man who contributed to the police benevolent fund. He was the man who stood for photos with the mayor. The audacity of his survival was as chilling as the crime itself. He watched the detectives fail. He read the headlines with the detached interest of a theater critic. He saw the silent slasher become a legend, and he smiled, knowing that he had outrun the law, outrun the fog, and outrun justice itself. Or so he thought, because in the basement of Scotland Yard, inside a box labeled Sterling C. 1975, a single strand of hair and a trace of skin were waiting for the world to change. They were waiting for the moment when the pillar of the community would finally have to face the ghost of the girl in Holland Park. The 1,400 days following the discovery in Holland Park were a masterclass in institutional exhaustion. Detective Inspector Marcus Thorne didn't just lead the investigation. He lived inside it, a man consumed by the sterile white light of the incident room and the smell of stale tobacco and cold tea. The Sterling case became a black hole in the heart of Scotland Yard, sucking in resources, manpower, and the spirits of every officer who touched the file. Thorne's desk was a landscape of failure. Maps of Kensington marked with red ink, thousands of index cards detailing the movements of men who had no business being in a park at 3 a.m, and the grainy black and white photos of the Silver Lion cufflink that mocked him from every angle. This wasn't just a murder, it was a challenge to the very order of the city. In 1975, the police were the kings of the street, Yet here was a phantom who had performed a surgical execution in the middle of a residential district and vanished like a smudge on a lens. The pressure from the commissioner was relentless. London was already on edge. The IRA bombings were a constant threat, the economy was cratering, and the winter of discontent was looming on the horizon. The public needed a win. They needed to know that a girl could buy milk without being slaughtered under an oak tree. But the leads were ghosts. Thorne's team interviewed over 4,000 men in the first 6 months. They swept through the jazz clubs of Soho, the flop houses of Paddington, and the high-walled estates of Belgravia. They looked for a man with medical training, a man with a steady hand and a cold heart. They looked for someone who owned an expensive set of silver lion cufflinks. But in the mid-70s, expensive was relative and status was a shield. When the list of owners included minor royals, high-ranking diplomats, and influential businessmen, the investigations often hit diplomatic sensitivities. Thorne found himself knocking on doors that were slammed shut by lawyers before he could even show his badge. The social fabric of London at the time worked in the killer's favor. It was a city divided by rigid class lines, where a man in a bespoke overcoat was rarely questioned by a beat cop, even if he looked out of breath. The silent slasher wasn't a monster from the sewers. He was a predator who understood the deference shown to authority. While Thorne was scouring the criminal underworld, the killer was likely sitting in a private members' club, sipping scotch and discussing the decline of British values. The irony was a jagged pill. The investigation's failure was rooted in a fundamental blind spot. The police were looking for a criminal, but the man they wanted was a citizen. He was someone who paid his taxes, someone who volunteered for local committees, someone who was currently building the very persona that would protect him for the next half-century. Inside the Sterling household, the silence was absolute. Claire's father, Elias, was a man who lived by the precision of gears and springs. He was a clockmaker by trade, a man who understood that every second was part of a grand, logical sequence. But the murder of his daughter was an illogical rupture in time. He spent his days in his workshop, surrounded by the rhythmic ticking of 100 clocks, trying to find the missing 7 minutes of November 14th. He became a fixture at the local police station, a ghost-like figure who would sit in the lobby for hours, waiting for news that never came. He didn't want revenge. He wanted the sequence restored. He wanted to know how the gears of the world had failed so catastrophically. Claire's mother, Martha, retreated into a different kind of darkness. She stopped listening to music. The cello was a trigger she couldn't survive. She moved through the house like a sleepwalker, her eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for the click of a key that would never turn. The family was a casualty of the cold case, long before the term was even coined. As the 1970s bled into the 80s, the silent slasher transitioned from a news headline to a local bogeyman. The intensity of the hunt began to fade, replaced by the crushing weight of new tragedies. The Yorkshire Ripper was dominating the national consciousness, and the resources of the Met were stretched to the breaking point. Thorne felt the case slipping through his fingers. He watched as the incident room was dismantled, the maps taken down, the index cards filed away in the basement archives. He kept his own private ledger, a small leather book filled with the names of the 12 lions, the men who owned the cufflinks but couldn't be fully cleared. At the top of that list, scribbled in blue ink, was the name of a rising young magistrate with a military background. He had an alibi, of course, a dinner party with several other pillars of the community, but something about his calm, measured responses during the initial interview had stayed with Thorne. He looked like a man who was playing a role, a man who was too perfect, too composed for someone being questioned about a brutal murder. But without evidence, without a witness, a feeling was just a slow-acting poison. The killer, meanwhile, was mastering the art of the double life. He understood that the best way to hide a dark secret was to surround it with a blinding light of public service. He began to donate heavily to the very park where he had left Claire's body. He became a patron of the arts, ironically supporting the same musical institutions that Claire had dreamed of joining. He was a man of the people, a man who spoke at town halls about restoring law and order and protecting our daughters from the rising tide of violence. Every charitable act was a brick in a wall of invincibility. He wasn't just escaping justice. He was rewriting his own DNA in the eyes of the public. He was becoming a pillar, a structural element of the community that no one would dare to pull down. He watched Thorne grow old. He watched the Sterling family wither. And he did it all with a serene, terrifying confidence. The 1980s brought the advent of the first computerized criminal databases, but they were primitive, filled with the records of petty thieves and career burglars. They had no place for a man of status. The Silver Lion cufflink remained in its evidence bag, a piece of dead metal that the new generation of detectives viewed as a relic of a bygone era. The 75 case was a ghost story told to recruits, a cautionary tale about how the fog can swallow the truth. The physical evidence, the clothes, the swabs, the hair, was moved from one warehouse to another, surviving leaks, fires, and administrative purges by sheer luck. It was as if the evidence itself was waiting, a silent witness holding its breath in the dark. Thorne retired in 1992, his final act being a visit to the evidence locker. He touched the box one last time, a silent apology to the girl who had vanished in 7 minutes. He knew he would die without knowing the truth, and he feared that the killer would die a hero. The neighborhood changed. The Talgarth Road flat was renovated, the brickwork cleaned of its coal soot, the old street lamps replaced by high-intensity sodium bulbs that left no room for ghosts. But the oak tree in Holland Park remained. It grew larger, its roots deepening into the soil where Claire's blood had once pooled. To the joggers and the nannies who passed it every day, it was just a tree. To the man who sat on the nearby bench every Sunday, it was an altar. He would sit there with his newspaper, a distinguished gentleman in a charcoal suit, looking every bit the respected elder. He would watch the children play and the musicians practice, and he would feel a profound sense of peace. He had beaten the system. He had beaten the fog. He had lived a full, rich life on the ashes of another. He was a pillar of the community, and he believed that as long as he kept building, as long as he kept donating, as long as he kept smiling, the ground would never open up to claim him. The silence of the case was not a void. It was a pressurized chamber. For 50 years, the truth was compressed by the weight of time, becoming harder and more dangerous with every passing decade. The silent slasher hadn't just gotten away with murder. He had stolen a half-century of peace from a city that didn't even remember his name. But the 2000s were coming, and with them, a scientific revolution that would turn the 7-minute gap into a digital forensic trail. The killer's mask of virtue was about to meet a force it couldn't charm or intimidate. The molecules were waking up. The Silver Lion was about to speak. And the magistrate who had spent his life judging others was about to find himself in the dock of a court where social standing meant nothing and the past never dies. The echo of Claire Sterling's cello was finally beginning to harmonize with the ticking of her father's clocks, counting down to a reckoning that would shatter the foundation of everything London believed to be true. The community would soon learn that their pillar was hollow, filled with the rot of a November night that refused to stay buried. The shock wouldn't just be the identity of the killer, but the realization that for 50 years they had been applauding the very man who had stolen their sense of safety. The sensation of the solved case would be a trauma all its own, a secondary explosion that would rip through the heart of the establishment. But for now, in the archives of the Yard, the file sat still. The dust was thick, the ink was faded, but the DNA was patient. It was a genetic ghost waiting for a ghost hunter, and the hunt was about to begin in a laboratory 500 miles away, where a young woman with a microscope was about to look at a 50-year-old silk thread and see the face of a monster. The transition from cold to active happened not with a shout, but with a flicker on a computer screen in a sterile laboratory in 2024. For decades, the Sterling file had been a stagnant pool of dead ends, but the digital age brought a new kind of alchemy, genetic genealogy. The science had evolved from simple blood typing to the ability to map the entire human blueprint from a single, microscopic skin cell. Dr. Sarah Finch, a forensic specialist who hadn't even been born when Claire Sterling was killed, was the one to pull the box from the archives. She didn't see a sensational headline. She saw a puzzle of degraded proteins and fragmented sequences. She focused on the silk lining of Claire's folded coat, the place where a killer's hand would have instinctively rested to press the garment flat. She used a vacuum-based recovery system, a device that breathed life into the dust, pulling 5-decade-old biological signatures from the weave of the fabric. The initial results were a mess of contamination. DNA from police officers of the 70s who didn't wear gloves, from the dog walker, from the lab technicians of the 90s. But beneath the noise was a persistent, ghostly signal. It was a male profile, partial and battered by time, but it possessed a specific rare marker on the Y chromosome. This wasn't a match for any criminal database. This silent slasher had never been fingerprinted. He had never been arrested for so much as a traffic violation. He was a ghost in the system because he was the system. Dr. Finch didn't stop there. She uploaded the profile to public ancestry databases, the kind used by millions of people to find their long-lost cousins or trace their Viking roots. Suddenly, the net was cast wide across the globe. The software began to churn, comparing Claire's killer to millions of ordinary citizens. It didn't find a subject A. It found a third cousin in Toronto. It found a great-nephew in Manchester. It found a second cousin once removed in Australia. The investigation was no longer about pounding the pavement. It was about building a family tree out of the ether. The cold case unit brought in specialist genealogists who worked backward through the 19th and 20th centuries, tracing the lineage of the Lyons. They were looking for a male descendant who was in London in 1975, who was between the ages of 20 and 40, and who had the means to possess a silver lion cufflink. The tree was sprawling, a forest of names and dates, but as they applied the filters of geography and biography, the branches began to fall away. The silent slasher was being cornered by his own relatives, betrayed by the very bloodline he had worked so hard to elevate. The list narrowed from hundreds to dozens, then to 5, and finally to 1. The name that emerged was a physical blow to the investigators, Sir Arthur Penhaligon. It was a name synonymous with the old guard of London. He was a retired High Court magistrate, a man who had been knighted for his services to the judiciary and his extensive work with inner-city youth charities. He was 81 years old, living in a sprawling, ivy-covered manor in the Kent countryside. He was the pillar of the community personified, a man of impeccable character, a war veteran, and a frequent guest at the most prestigious tables in the country. The detectives stared at the profile in disbelief. In 1975, Penhaligon had been a 30-year-old rising star in the legal world, a man known for his sharp mind and his unshakable moral compass. He was the very man Detective Thorne had interviewed and dismissed because his alibi was provided by 3 other men of equal standing. The team realized they couldn't just knock on his door. To accuse a man of Sir Arthur's stature required more than a genealogical probability. It required a direct, undeniable link. They began a shadow operation, a high-stakes game of surveillance that felt more like espionage than police work. They followed the elderly knight as he went about his dignified life. They watched him attend garden parties, they watched him feed the ducks in the village pond, and they watched him enter the local church every Sunday. He moved with a practiced grace, a man who had spent 50 years perfecting the role of the good man. But beneath the tailored suits and the benevolent smile, the scientists knew there was a biological truth waiting to be seized. The breakthrough came at a charity gala in London, an event Penhaligon was attending as a guest of honor. An undercover officer, dressed in a tuxedo, waited for the moment the magistrate finished his glass of champagne. As Penhaligon set the glass on a waiter's tray and turned to greet a duchess, the officer moved in. The glass was whisked away into a sterile bag before the condensation had even evaporated. The lab worked through the night in a state of electric tension. This was the final bridge. They compared the fresh DNA from the champagne glass to the 50-year-old ghost from Claire's coat and the silver lion cufflink. The match was 99.9%. The probability that the DNA belonged to anyone other than Arthur Penhaligon was 1 in a billion. The pillar wasn't just cracked, he was the source of the rot. The man who had spent his career sentencing others to prison was the very man who had carved a girl's throat in a London park and watched the world bleed out from the comfort of his privilege. The shock within the unit was followed by a grim, cold resolve. They were no longer investigating a cold case. They were preparing to topple a titan. The arrest warrant was prepared in total secrecy, signed by a judge who had to be sworn to silence. The 7-minute gap was about to be closed 50 years after the clicking of Claire's heels had stopped in the fog. The predator who had hidden in the highest towers of society was finally coming down into the dirt, and the city of London was about to wake up to a nightmare it thought it had forgotten. The arrest of Sir Arthur Penhaligon was not a spectacle, it was a surgical extraction. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, while the Kent countryside was still draped in a thin, milky vapor that felt like a callback to 1975, 3 black sedans pulled into the gravel driveway of Penhaligon Manor. There were no sirens, no shouting, no battering rams. The officers moved with a quiet, heavy intentionality. When the heavy oak door opened, the man who stood there was the picture of elderly dignity. A silk robe cinched at the waist, a silver-maned head tilted in polite confusion, the eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime demanding respect. But when the lead detective spoke the name Claire Sterling, the mask didn't just slip, it dissolved. For a fraction of a second, the pillar of the community vanished, and in his place stood the silent slasher, his eyes darkening with a 50-year-old hunger that had never truly been fed. The news of the arrest hit London like a seismic event. The headlines were a frantic blur. The Knight of Holland Park, judge charged with 1975 cold case, the monster in the manor. The community was plunged into a state of cognitive dissonance. This was a man who had sat on the bench and looked down upon the criminal element with icy disdain. This was a man who had been toasted at the Guildhall, a man who had advised Home Secretaries on the moral decay of Britain. The betrayal was so deep it felt personal to every citizen who had ever believed in the integrity of the establishment. People began to look back at his career with a new, horrified lens. They remembered his harshest sentences, his speeches on the sanctity of life, and they realized that every word had been a layer of camouflage, every charitable donation a bribe to the gods of chance. As Penhaligon was led into the police station, he didn't cower. He walked with the measured gait of a man heading to a board meeting, his chin high, his expression one of bored annoyance. In the interrogation room, he faced the descendants of the men who had failed to catch him in 1975. The detectives presented the evidence: the DNA match, the genealogical tree, the silver lion cufflink. They showed him the photos of Claire, the vibrant girl with the cello and the broken body under the tree. Penhaligon looked at the images with a detached, clinical interest. He didn't deny it. He didn't admit it. He simply sat in the silence, a master of the 7-minute gap, waiting for his high-priced lawyers to arrive and turn the biological truth into a legal technicality. But the police had been busy. While Penhaligon sat in his cell, a team of forensic archaeologists was tearing apart his manor house. They weren't just looking for blood. They were looking for the trophy room of a sociopath. Hidden behind a false wall in the library, beneath a collection of rare legal texts, they found a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a collection of items that stopped the heart of every officer in the room. A dried lock of dark hair, a single earring that matched the one Claire was wearing the night she died, and a series of journals written in a precise, elegant hand. These weren't diaries. They were manifestos of a predator. Penhaligon had recorded his hunts with the cold detail of a biologist, describing the geometry of the incision and the satisfying silence of the fog. The journals revealed the terrifying truth of his double life. Claire Sterling hadn't been a random victim. She had been a project. He had followed her for weeks, studying her routine, timing the 7-minute gap, until he knew the exact second to strike. He had chosen the silver lion cufflink specifically because it was a mark of his status, a signature left by a man who believed he was untouchable. He wrote about the thrill of the bench, describing the dark irony of sentencing a thief to prison while he carried a girl's life in his pocket. The pillar had been laughing at the world for 50 years, his virtua costume he wore to get closer to his prey. The community's shock turned into a roaring, vengeful anger. The manor house was surrounded by protesters, the charities he supported scrambled to scrub his name from their records, and the legal world was thrown into a crisis of legitimacy. If a man like Penhaligon could be a murderer, who could be trusted? The investigation began to expand, looking at every cold case, every missing girl, every unsolved mystery that occurred in the shadow of his long and prestigious career. The silent slasher was no longer a ghost. He was a map of human depravity, a man who had used the very fabric of society to hide the blood on his hands. The trial was set to be the trial of the century, a reckoning not just for a man, but for an entire era of blind deference and hidden monsters. The Sterling family, or what was left of it, watched the news in a state of paralysis. Claire's brother, now an old man himself, spoke to the press with a voice that shook with 50 years of repressed grief. He didn't talk about the DNA or the pillar. He talked about the cello that had sat silent in a corner for half a century. He talked about the clocks that his father had never stopped winding, waiting for a time that would never come. For the family, the arrest wasn't closure. It was a second murder. They had to realize that the man who killed their sister had been honored by the Queen while they were burying their parents. The sensation was a bitter fruit, and the trial promised to be a grueling journey through the heart of darkness. As the first week of the arrest came to a close, London felt different. The fog was gone, replaced by the harsh, unblinking glare of the digital age. The silent slasher was in a cage, his journals were in evidence bags, and his manor was a crime scene. But the shadow he cast was longer than ever. The city realized that the 7-minute gap wasn't just a lapse in time, it was a lapse in the human soul. The pillar of the community had fallen, and as the dust settled, the world saw that the foundation he stood on was built of bones. The trial was coming, and the Lion was about to find out that in the 21st century, even the most prestigious mask cannot hide the mark of a killer from the eyes of the law. The courtroom at the Old Bailey did not feel like a hall of justice. It felt like a theater of the macabre, a place where the ghosts of 1975 were being summoned into the fluorescent glare of the present. Sir Arthur Penhaligon sat in the dock, no longer the sprawling master of a Kent manor, but a shrunken, skeletal figure wrapped in an expensive charcoal suit that seemed to wear him rather than the other way around. Yet his eyes remained defiant, cold, sharp, and predatory. This was the trial of the century, a legal battle that sought to bridge a 50-year chasm of silence. The gallery was packed with the descendants of the original investigators, true crime historians, and a public that was both repulsed and mesmerized by the collapse of a titan. The air was thick with a collective, held breath. The prosecution began with a blow that shattered the defense's opening strategy of mistaken identity. They didn't lead with the DNA, they led with the journals. The manifestos of the Lion were read aloud, their elegant, cursive prose describing the murder of Claire Sterling with a detachment that made the skin of the jurors crawl. The prosecutor, a woman with a voice like sharpened flint, read Penhaligon's own words. The fog is the perfect accomplice. It mutes the scream. It softens the steel. She was a silhouette of Bach and strings, and in that moment, I became the conductor of her silence. The courtroom was so quiet that the scratching of a reporter's pen sounded like a gunshot. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of artistic vanity. Penhaligon had viewed Claire not as a human being, but as a medium for his own dark expression. The defense fought back with the desperate ferocity of a trapped animal. They attacked the genetic genealogy as a pseudoscience, a violation of privacy that relied on tainted ancestral data. They pointed to the 1975 evidence storage, the cardboard boxes, the fluctuating temperatures, the decades of dust. They argued that the DNA found on the coat was environmental transfer, a result of Penhaligon perhaps brushing past the victim in a crowded street days before the crime. They painted a picture of a distinguished public servant being crucified by a forensic witch hunt designed to satisfy a modern thirst for sensation. But their arguments felt hollow against the physical weight of the items recovered from the manor's false wall. The turning point of the trial came on the 14th day, when the prosecution called the genetic ghost to the stand, Dr. Sarah Finch. She didn't look like a hunter, but as she explained the persistence of the biological record, she became the most dangerous person in the room for Penhaligon. She didn't speak in theories, she spoke in certainties. She showed the jury the microscopic mapping of the silver lion cufflink. She showed how the skin cells were embedded beneath the silver plating's wear patterns, proving they had been deposited at the time of the struggle, not decades later through transfer. She turned the science into a narrative of inevitability. The 7-minute gap was no longer a mystery. It was a digital trail that led directly to the man in the dock. Then came the emotional crescendo, the testimony of the missing generation. One by one, the retired officers of the 1975 task force were wheeled or helped into the witness box. They were old men now, their voices thin and reedy, but their memories of the silent slasher were vivid as nightmares. They spoke of the frustration, the dead ends, and the silver lion that had haunted their careers. When Marcus Thorne's successor, carrying Thorne's original leather ledger, read out the name of the 12 lions, the courtroom felt the weight of 50 years of missed opportunities. The magistrate had been on that list. He had been protected by the very system he presided over. The jury looked at Penhaligon and saw not a knight, but a parasite that had fed on the trust of a nation. The defense's final witness was Penhaligon himself. It was a gamble that backfired with spectacular horror. He didn't take the stand to plead his innocence. He took it to lecture the court. He spoke of the necessity of order and the burden of the elite. He looked at the jury not as peers, but as subjects. When asked about Claire Sterling, he didn't express remorse. He spoke of her as a lost note in a symphony that only he could hear. It was a confession wrapped in arrogance, a final middle finger to the world that had finally caught him. In that moment, the pillar didn't just crack, it disintegrated into a pile of narcissistic ash. The man was a void, a creature of pure, cold ego who had used the law as a playground for his depravity. The jury's deliberation took less than 4 hours, a heartbeat in the context of a 50-year wait. The verdict was a single word that echoed through the Old Bailey like a thunderclap: guilty. As the foreman spoke, a small, choked sob broke out from the back of the room. Claire's brother, finally hearing the truth acknowledged by the state. Penhaligon didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply adjusted his silk tie, looked at the judge, a man who had once been his junior, and gave a slight, mocking nod. He was a creature of the establishment to the very end, even as the establishment finally vomited him out. The judge's sentencing was a blistering indictment of the double life. He spoke of the unparalleled betrayal of a magistrate who used his knowledge of the law to circumvent it. He sentenced Penhaligon to life in prison, with a minimum term that ensured the 81-year-old would die behind bars. But as the silent slasher was led down to the cells, the victory felt heavy. The community was left to pick through the wreckage of their own trust. The charities, the hospitals, the legal boards, they all had to reckon with the fact that they had been built on a foundation of blood. The pillar was gone, but the hole he left in the city's psyche was deep and jagged. The trial was over, the DNA had spoken, and the 7-minute gap was closed, but the shadow of 1975 would linger in the London air long after the prison doors slammed shut. The resolution of the Sterling case marked a tectonic shift in the landscape of British law enforcement, a moment where the analog past finally surrendered to the digital future. The conviction of Sir Arthur Penhaligon wasn't just a win for the prosecution. It was the ratification of a new era, a testament to the terrifying and hopeful reality that time is no longer a sanctuary for the guilty. The use of genetic genealogy in the Penhaligon trial set a legal precedent that sent shockwaves through the world of criminal justice, effectively turning the cold case from a dead end into a waiting room. Suddenly, every unsolved murder from the 60s, 70s, and 80s was back on the table. The unsolvable was now merely waiting for processing. The boxes in the basement of Scotland Yard, once gathering dust as monuments to failure, began to vibrate with potential energy. The legal community dubbed it the Sterling Protocol, a rigorous new standard for handling historical biological evidence. No longer was a sample considered too degraded or too small without being subjected to the gauntlet of next-generation sequencing. The Penhaligon verdict proved that even a few hundred picograms of DNA, battered by 50 years of humidity and mishandling, could bring down a knight of the realm. But this scientific miracle brought with it a storm of ethical complexity. As the champagne corks popped in the forensic labs, a fierce debate ignited in the halls of Parliament and the op-ed columns of the national press. The public began to realize the double-edged sword of their curiosity. The very databases they had used to find their Viking roots or connect with second cousins in America had inadvertently become a global dragnet for the police. The familial search technique used to catch Penhaligon relied on the genetic data of innocent people, distant relatives who had never committed a crime, yet whose DNA provided the triangulation points to locate a monster. Civil liberties groups raised the alarm, arguing that this was a violation of genetic privacy, a slippery slope toward a surveillance state where your own biology could be used against your family without your consent. They painted a dystopian picture of a world where anonymity was biologically impossible. But for the families of victims like Claire, the debate was offensive. To them, privacy was a luxury of the living. Justice was the necessity of the dead. When Claire's brother was asked about the ethics of the search, his response silenced the room. "My sister didn't consent to have her throat cut. The killer didn't ask for permission to take her future. Why should we ask for permission to find him?" Dr. Sarah Finch, the architect of the match, found herself at the center of this hurricane. She was an unlikely celebrity, a quiet, methodical scientist who preferred the hum of a sequencer to the flash of a camera. Yet, she became the face of the revolution. She appeared on news programs, not to bask in the glory, but to defend the science. She spoke with a calm, clinical passion about the persistence of the biological record. She explained that we leave ourselves behind in every room we enter, on every object we touch. A single skin cell, trapped for 50 years in the thread of a coat, is a time capsule. It carries the same information today as it did the moment it was shed. DNA doesn't lie, she told a packed auditorium at a forensic symposium. It doesn't forget. It doesn't have an agenda. It is simply a record of presence. And if you were present at a murder, that record belongs to the truth. Her work on the Sterling case became the syllabus for a new generation of forensic experts. The Finch method of extracting DNA from difficult substrates, like the corroded silver of the lion cufflink, was published in top journals, leading to a global re-examination of evidence. Items that had been dismissed as useless, rusty weapons, waterlogged clothing, envelope seals from ransom notes, were suddenly gold mines. The message to the criminal element was clear and terrifying. Your own body is your greatest enemy. You can burn your clothes, you can melt the weapon, you can move to another continent, you can change your name and your face, but you cannot change your DNA. It is a permanent, indelible barcode that links you to your actions forever. The concept of the perfect crime was effectively dead. As long as you are biological, you are traceable. The impact was immediate. In the 12 months following Penhaligon's sentencing, the Metropolitan Police announced the reopening of 14 major cold cases. These were the unreachables, the cases that had haunted detectives for decades. One by one, they began to crack. A rapist who had terrorized Manchester in the 80s was found living as a grandfather in Spain. A murderer who had killed a hitchhiker in 1974 was identified as a deceased truck driver, bringing closure to a family that had waited 40 years. The Sterling effect was a domino cascade. Every arrest made the news, and every news story chipped away at the confidence of those who thought they had gotten away with it. There was a palpable sense of paranoia rippling through the aging criminal population. Men who had lived quiet, respectable lives for decades suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. They watched the news with a knot of dread in their stomachs, wondering if the stamp they licked in 1982 or the hair they left on a car seat in 1979 was currently spinning in a centrifuge in Dr. Finch's lab. The Penhaligon case proved that status was no shield. If a high court magistrate could be dragged from his manor house in handcuffs, no one was safe. The statute of limitations on murder had always been non-existent in law, but now, thanks to science, it was non-existent in practice. But the science of justice wasn't just about catching the guilty, it was about exonerating the innocent. The same technology that condemned Penhaligon was used to clear the names of men who had been wrongly suspected for decades. The list of the 12 lions, the men who had owned the cufflinks and lived under a cloud of suspicion, was officially cleared. For the families of those men, some of whom had died with the stain of the silent slasher on their reputation, the DNA evidence was a posthumous pardon. It restored honor to names that had been unfairly tarnished by police desperation and public rumor. The science cut both ways, a blade of pure truth that sliced through the fog of assumption and bias. The Sterling case also forced a modernization of police infrastructure. The dusty basements were replaced by climate-controlled biobanks. Evidence handling procedures were rewritten to treat every crime scene as a potential 50-year time capsule. Future-proofing became the buzzword. Detectives were trained to think not just about what the evidence could tell them today, but what it might tell a scientist in 2050. They collected samples they couldn't yet analyze, banking on the certainty that the technology would continue to accelerate. The legacy of Claire Sterling was a police force that was humbler, more meticulous, and infinitely more patient. As the years passed, the science of justice became normalized. The shock of the Penhaligon arrest faded, but the structural changes remained. The public grew used to the idea that a cold case was just a temporary state. The mystery novel trope of the clever detective solving the riddle with intuition was being replaced by the reality of the technician solving it with an algorithm. But there was a romance to this new reality, too. It was the romance of the inescapable truth. There was something profoundly satisfying about the idea that the universe keeps a record, that nothing is truly lost, that the cry of a victim in a foggy park is not swallowed by the silence, but encoded in the very atoms of the scene, waiting for us to learn how to listen. The Sterling case was the catalyst, the Big Bang, of forensic genealogy in the UK. It proved that the past is not a foreign country. It is right here, living under our fingernails and in the roots of our hair. It taught a society that had become cynical about justice that while the wheels may grind slowly, they grind exceedingly fine. The Pillar of Kent thought he was above the law, but he was merely biology, and biology always answers to the laws of nature. The science had finally caught up to the sin, and the message to every predator with a dark secret was written in the headlines. The clock is ticking, the lab is open, and there are no more shadows deep enough to hide a murder. Even with the conviction secured and the Pillar of Kent locked away in the high-security wing of Belmarsh Prison, a profound sense of unease lingered in the streets of Kensington. The closure provided by the court was mathematical, a balance of DNA and statutes, but it wasn't emotional. This silent slasher was behind bars, yet the fear he had planted in the soil of 1975 had grown into a twisted, permanent part of the city's landscape. People still instinctively avoided that specific corner of Holland Park after dark, their pace quickening as they passed the ancient oak tree. The story of the magistrate killer had transcended the news cycle to become part of the dark folklore of London, a grim fable whispered to remind the naive that the person who signs the laws might be the one breaking them in the most horrific ways. Inside the prison, Arthur Penhaligon did not wither as many had hoped. He adapted with the chilling fluidity of a creature that has no true shape. He treated his cell not as a cage, but as a monastic cell, a place of enforced contemplation. He refused to mingle with other prisoners, whom he viewed as crude failures, preferring to spend his days reading classical literature and writing endless letters to legal scholars, debating points of law that had nothing to do with his crimes. He never appealed his sentence. To him, the trial had been the final act of his performance, and the verdict was simply the curtain coming down. He accepted his fate with a terrifying serenity, a man who believed he had already won because he had lived 50 years of freedom on stolen time. The true horror, however, came not from his silence, but from the few times he chose to speak. In a series of recorded interviews with a forensic psychiatrist, tapes that would later be leaked and dissected by a horrified public, Penhaligon finally hinted at the why. There was no tale of childhood abuse, no snap of sudden rage, no chaotic voice in his head. His motive was far colder, far more alien. He spoke of Claire Sterling not as a human being with a future, but as a moment of aesthetic perfection that he felt compelled to still. He described the scene in the fog as a tableau, a living painting that was too beautiful to be allowed to age or decay. He wanted to freeze her in that 7-minute gap, to possess her final breath as a collector might possess a rare butterfly. This revelation added a new, suffocating layer of horror to the case. It wasn't a crime of passion, it was a crime of aesthetics. To Penhaligon, murder was a form of curation. He killed because he felt entitled to decide when a life had reached its peak. This cold, detached narcissism was infinitely harder for the public to swallow than a crime of anger. Anger is a human emotion. It is relatable, even if its consequences are tragic. But this was the logic of a predator who viewed the rest of humanity as mere props in his personal theater. The Pillar hadn't just hidden a crime. He had hidden a completely different way of perceiving reality. He had looked at a vibrant young woman and seen only an object to be broken and shelved. For the Sterling family, the justice was a hollow metallic victory. Claire was still gone. Her father, the clockmaker who had tried to fix the broken time, had died years before the arrest, never knowing the name of the man who ruined his life. Her mother, who had retreated into a fortress of silence, had passed away with her eyes still fixed on the front door. Claire's brother, the last guardian of her memory, found that the truth brought no relief, only a heavier burden. He had to live with the knowledge that while his family was slowly disintegrating under the weight of grief, Penhaligon was drinking vintage wine and receiving knighthoods. The why didn't fix the what. Knowing that his sister died because a magistrate wanted to capture a moment of perfection didn't bring her back. It only made her absence feel more cruel, more senseless. The community, too, felt a deep collective shame. It was a specific kind of nausea that comes from realizing you have loved a monster. Thousands of people in London had shaken Penhaligon's hand. They had laughed at his jokes at dinner parties. They had applauded his speeches on morality. They had trusted him with their secrets and their children's futures. The realization that they had been so easily deceived was a blow to their own self-worth. It forced a cynical reevaluation of every pillar in society. If Penhaligon, the war hero, the judge, the philanthropist, could be a serial killer, then who was safe? The case eroded the automatic deference to authority that had defined the British class system for generations. It replaced trust with a permanent, squinting suspicion. As the years began to pass, the daily sensationalism faded, but the Sterling shadow remained. The case became a staple of true crime documentaries, podcasts, and academic papers. Each retelling focused on a different facet: the fog, the cufflink, the DNA, the double life. But they all circled back to the same central, haunting theme: the betrayal. Penhaligon had committed the ultimate transgression against the social contract. He had used his position as a protector to become the supreme predator. He didn't just kill Claire Sterling. He killed the idea that we can truly know the people who lead us. The City of London, usually so resilient, found that this wound refused to heal cleanly. It scarred over, thick and hard. The Penhaligon Trust, a charity he had founded, was dissolved, its assets liquidated and donated to victim support groups, but the buildings it had funded still stood, silent monuments to a lie. The 7-minute gap became a metaphor for the secrets that exist in the spaces between what we see and what is true. The case left the community a little colder, a little harder, and a lot more afraid of the dark. We realized that the most dangerous camouflage isn't a mask or a hood. It's a suit, a smile, and a reputation that no one dares to question. The silent slasher was locked away, but he had succeeded in leaving behind a world that would never again look at a good man, without wondering what he might be capable of when the fog rolls in. Arthur Penhaligon died in his prison cell 3 years into his life sentence. He was 84 years old. He died in his sleep, a quiet, unremarkable exit that stood in stark, infuriating contrast to the violence he had inflicted on others. There was no final confession, no moment of reckoning, no fear in his eyes. He simply ceased to exist, slipping away in the gray pre-dawn light of a correctional facility, far removed from the velvet-draped canopy bed where he had slept for most of his life. When the prison guards found him during the morning count, he looked as he always did, composed, arrogant, and utterly detached from the reality of his cage. He left behind a massive estate, a fortune built on old money and shrewd investments, but he left no heirs willing to claim it. The news of his death didn't spark grief. It sparked a frenzy of legal bureaucracy. For a decade, the Penhaligon fortune was tied up in a purgatory of litigation. His distant relatives, terrified of the stigma attached to his blood money, distanced themselves from the inheritance. Eventually, the courts intervened, and in a final twist of poetic justice, the entirety of his wealth was seized and distributed to the very people he had victimized. The millions that had once bought his suits and his silence were funneled into a trust for cold case research and victim advocacy. The Pillar of Kent was posthumously funding the hunt for men exactly like him. There was no funeral. The body of the former High Court magistrate was not taken to a cathedral. It was not carried by pallbearers in solemn procession. No one came to claim him. He was buried in a nameless grave in the prison cemetery, a small patch of dirt marked only by a prisoner number. It was a stark, humiliating end for a man who had secretly commissioned a grand, marble mausoleum for himself years earlier. A monument to his own ego that now stood empty and abandoned on a hill in Surrey, eventually to be demolished by the local council. The man who wanted to be remembered as a giant was erased, put into the ground with the same careless anonymity he had forced upon his victims in the fog. The day he died, the sun was shining in London, a bright, clear, piercing day that felt like a final exorcism of the 1975 fog. In the basement of Scotland Yard, a senior archivist performed the final administrative act of the saga. He took the heavy, battered file labeled Sterling C. and stamped it with a bold red ink, closed. It was a sound that should have been insignificant, the thud of rubber on paper, but it felt heavy with history. It signified a resolution, half a century in the making. The box was moved from the active rack to the historic archive, not as a symbol of failure, but as a trophy of perseverance. But the final reckoning wasn't about Penhaligon's death. It was about the legacy the case imprinted on the world. The Sterling Protocol became the gold standard for how cold cases were handled across Europe and North America. The case taught a generation of detectives that no detail is too small, no evidence is too old, and no suspect is too respectable to be questioned. It shattered the bias of the likely suspect. It forced investigators to look up from the gutters and scan the penthouses. The unlikely was no longer impossible. It was just a hypothesis waiting for a DNA test. This case changed the way we think about time and justice. We used to believe that time was an escape route, that if you could run fast enough and live long enough, the past would eventually tire out and stop chasing you. The Sterling case proved that the past doesn't run, it waits. It waits in the grooves of a cufflink, in the fibers of a coat, in the microscopic debris of a struggle. It waits in the blood of a killer's descendants. Justice, in this case, wasn't a swift sword. It was a slow, inevitable tide. It took 50 years to reach the shore, but when it did, it washed away the lies of a lifetime with the force of a tsunami. The story of the London 1975 cold case remains one of the most significant chapters in criminal history. It is a story of a girl who loved Bach, a monster who loved power, and a world that eventually found the truth in a drop of water. It serves as a permanent, flashing warning to those who think they can hide behind a mask of virtue. The light of science is getting brighter, the resolution is getting sharper, and there are no more shadows deep enough to hide a murder. The perfect crime is a relic of the analog age. In the digital world, the dead speak, and they speak with a voice that can shatter the walls of a manor house and open the doors of a prison cell. Even now, decades after the arrest and years after the death of the killer, the streets of Kensington seem to hold the memory of the Sterling case in their very stones. If you walk past Talgarth Road on a damp November evening, when the modern LED streetlights struggle against the encroaching mist, you might still feel a shiver that has nothing to do with the temperature. The case has become a ghost story for the modern age, a narrative that bridges the gap between the gritty, analog realism of the 1970s and the high-tech, sterile precision of the present. It is a reminder that London is a city built on layers. Layers of history, layers of secrets, and layers of blood. The asphalt may have been repaved, the buildings sandblasted, and the phone booths removed, but the 7-minute gap is still there, a psychic scar on the geography of the city. The epicenter of this lingering memory is the Black Museum at Scotland Yard, officially known as the Crime Museum. It is a place not open to the public, a collection of the macabre and the evidentiary that serves as a teaching tool for officers. There, in a glass display case illuminated by a harsh halogen spotlight, rests the silver lion cufflink. It is a small object, no larger than a coin, yet it commands the room with a terrifying gravity. It is polished, glittering, and utterly benign in appearance. To look at it is to see the terrifying banality of evil. It is not a weapon, it is an accessory. It is a symbol of vanity that became an instrument of doom. Visitors, trainee detectives, forensic students, visiting dignitaries, often stop in front of the case and stare at the lion. They try to imagine the man who wore it. They try to conjure the image of Sir Arthur Penhaligon, the magistrate, the pillar, the slasher. They look for the scene where the good man ended and the monster began, searching for some physical flaw in the object that would betray its dark history. But they find nothing. There was no seam. The silver lion was worn to weddings and to murders. It was fastened by hands that signed charity checks and hands that held a knife. The object is a testament to the fact that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a gentleman dressing for dinner. The case also serves as a permanent, silent tribute to the unsung heroes of this half-century saga. History often remembers the killer and the victim, but the Sterling case belongs to the persistent. It belongs to the dog walker in 1975 who didn't look away, who stood shivering in the frost to guard the body until the police arrived. It belongs to Detective Inspector Marcus Thorne, who kept the file in his desk for 20 years, refusing to let it be archived into oblivion, passing on his obsession like a baton to the next generation. It belongs to Dr. Sarah Finch, who spent her weekends in a basement lab, squinting at degraded DNA profiles when everyone else told her it was a waste of time. These are the people who kept Claire Sterling's memory alive when the rest of the world wanted to forget. They are the ones who refused to let the fog have the final word. Their persistence is the real story here. A 50-year relay race where the baton was a quest for the truth. They didn't do it for fame. Thorne died before the arrest, and the dog walker was long gone. They did it because of a fundamental, unshakable belief that a life cannot just be erased. They proved that while evil may be patient, justice is stubborn. The killer had 50 years of luck. The investigators only needed one moment of science. In the end, Arthur Penhaligon failed in his ultimate goal. He wanted to be the protagonist of a grand, secret narrative. He viewed himself as a dark artist, a man who possessed a superior understanding of life and death. He thought he was writing a tragedy where he was the untouchable director. But history has rewritten his script. He is not remembered as a mastermind. He is remembered as a liar. He is not a pillar. He is a cautionary tale. He has become a footnote in the history of forensic science, a test case for a new protocol, a biological sample in a database. His legacy is not the terror he inspired, but the scientific advancements his capture necessitated. He tried to immortalize himself through murder, but he ended up immortalizing the very system that destroyed him. The real enduring presence is Claire Sterling. She was just 22, a girl who should have been a world-class cellist. She should have played in the Royal Albert Hall. She should have taught students. She should have grown old. The music she never got to play is the real tragedy of this story, a silent symphony that still echoes in the hearts of those who know her narrative. When the wind blows through the bare branches of the oak tree in Holland Park, some say you can almost hear the ghost of a cello suite, a melancholic, beautiful sound that defies the silence of the grave. This Sterling echo is a phenomenon that has touched the artistic soul of the city. A bench was dedicated to her, not far from where she was found, bearing a simple inscription, "For Claire and the music that never ends." Musicians often come to the park to practice near that spot, a spontaneous, uncoordinated tradition that has turned the site of a horror into a garden of sound. Violins, cellos, flutes. The park is alive with the art that Penhaligon tried to extinguish. It is the ultimate act of defiance. The killer tried to create a stillness, a void of perfection. The city responded by filling that void with life, with noise, with the messy, beautiful continuity of human expression. As we stand in the present day, looking back at the long, twisting road of this investigation, we are left with a profound sense of humility. We realize that we are not the masters of the past, we are merely its custodians. The truth is not something we create, it is something we uncover. It was always there, waiting in the dark, waiting in the silver, waiting in the blood. The London of 1975 is gone, swallowed by time, but its lessons remain sharp and urgent. We have learned that there is no statute of limitations on grief, and there is no expiration date on the truth. The case is closed. The red stamp is on the file. The killer is in the ground. But the echo remains. It reverberates in the cold case units where detectives are currently opening old boxes. It reverberates in the labs where scientists are sequencing the unsequenceable. And it reverberates in the streets of Kensington where the fog still rolls in, but where the shadows are no longer quite so deep because we now know how to see in the dark. The silent slasher thought he could silence the world, but he only succeeded in making the truth louder than it has ever been. In the end, the story of Claire Sterling and Arthur Penhaligon is not merely a chronicle of a murder solved. It is a meditation on the terrifying, absolute endurance of the truth. As we stand at the conclusion of this 50-year odyssey, looking back at the wreckage of lives and the triumph of science, we must confront a difficult reality. The file may be closed, but the wound remains open. We live in a society that is addicted to the concept of closure. We crave the narrative arc where the handcuffs click, the gavel bangs, the villain is removed, and the world returns to a state of equilibrium. But the Sterling case, in its vast, tragic scope, teaches us that closure is a myth invented by the living to comfort themselves against the silence of the dead. There is no resetting the clock. There is no unspilling the blood. The pillar of the community was a lie that stood tall and proud for half a century, casting a shadow in which a monster thrived, and no amount of retrospective justice can give back the sunlight that was stolen from the Sterling family. The justice that was finally delivered was mathematical, not restorative. It was a balancing of the legal books, a transaction of DNA and statutes. It came too late for Elias Sterling, the clockmaker who died trying to fix a broken timeline. It came too late for Martha Sterling, who withered away in a house where the music had stopped. It came too late for the generation of women who walked through London in the late 70s and 80s with a knot of fear in their stomachs, looking at every passing shadow and wondering if the silent slasher was watching. The verdict was a victory for the state, but for the human hearts involved, it was a confirmation of a nightmare. It confirmed that the world is a place where a man can carve a woman's throat in a frozen park and then spend the next 5 decades being applauded as a saint. It confirmed that the face of evil is not always a twisted mask of rage. Sometimes, it is the calm, benevolent face of the man sitting at the head of the table. What truly remains, now that the sensational headlines have faded and the manor house has been reduced to dust, is the lesson. It is a lesson etched in the acid of betrayal. The case forces us to deconstruct our own perceptions of power and virtue. We are hardwired to trust the pillars. We are taught to defer to the suit, the title, the accent, the charitable donation. Arthur Penhaligon understood this biological imperative better than anyone. He weaponized our trust. He built a fortress out of our assumptions. This Sterling lesson is a warning to never stop looking closer. It tells us that the pedestal is often the safest place for a predator to hide, because no one thinks to look for blood on the shoes of a giant. The silver lion cufflink, the folded coat, the single surgical incision. These were not just clues. They were the whispers of a victim who refused to be silenced, breadcrumbs left in the dark forest of 1975, waiting for a traveler with the right eyes to find them. As the sun sets over Holland Park today, casting long, golden shadows across the grass, the orange glow of the modern LED street lamps is a far cry from the dim, gaslit orbs that witnessed the crime. The fog is thinner now, scrubbed away by environmental regulations and a changing climate. The city is louder, a cacophony of digital noise and constant surveillance. But the human heart remains the same, capable of both immense, soaring beauty and unimaginable, cold cruelty. The Sterling case acts as a mirror held up to our modern society, asking us a question that we are collectively afraid to answer. How many other pillars are currently hiding in our midst? How many other men are sitting in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in legislative halls, their hands manicured and clean, their secrets buried deep within their genetic code, waiting for a knock on the door that hasn't come yet? The horror of this case is not that it happened once. It is the gnawing suspicion that it is happening right now, somewhere else, protected by the same veil of prestige and silence. The mystery is solved in the eyes of the law, but the obsession continues in the mind of the public. We are drawn to these stories not because we enjoy the macabre, but because they touch something primal within us, the fear of the unknown and the desperate hope for ultimate accountability. Claire Sterling's cello may be silent, but her story has become a loud, ringing bell that warns us of the darkness that can live within the light. It is a story that ends not with a period, but with a question mark that will hang over the city for another 50 years. The case is a cold, hard fact, a collection of evidence bags and court transcripts, but the horror is a living thing, an unfinished symphony of blood and betrayal that will never truly find its final note. The Sterling echo reverberates through the architecture of London, a sonic boom of truth that shattered the glass house of a reputation built on lies. This case has also fundamentally altered the metaphysics of crime and punishment. It has changed the way we understand the passage of time. We used to believe that time was an escape route, that the further you moved away from the moment of the sin, the safer you became. We believed that the past was a foreign country, a place that could be left behind. But the Sterling case proved that the past is not a foreign country. It is a ghost that walks beside us, step for step. It proved that time does not erode the truth. It preserves it. The truth waits. It waits in the microscopic grooves of a cufflink, in the stubborn fibers of a wool coat, in the invisible debris of a struggle. It waits in the blood of a killer's descendants, a biological time bomb ticking down to zero. Justice, we have learned, is not a swift sword. It is a slow, inevitable tide. It took 50 years to reach the shore, but when it did, it washed away the lies of a lifetime with the force of a tsunami. And what of the legacy of the man himself? Arthur Penhaligon failed in his ultimate, narcissistic goal. He wanted to be the protagonist of a grand, secret narrative, a Übermensch, who stood above the petty morality of the common herd. He viewed himself as a dark artist, a man who possessed a superior, detached understanding of life and death. He thought he was writing a tragedy where he was the untouchable director. But history has rewritten his script. He is not remembered as a mastermind. He is remembered as a liar. He is not a pillar. He is a cautionary tale. He has become a footnote in the history of forensic science, a test case for a new protocol, a biological sample in a database labeled with a prisoner number. His legacy is not the terror he inspired, but the scientific advancements his capture necessitated. He tried to immortalize himself through the power of death, but he ended up immortalizing the very system that destroyed him. His name is no longer carved in marble. It is printed on case studies used to teach young detectives how to catch monsters. But the real, enduring presence, the spirit that refuses to be exorcised from the streets of Kensington, is Claire Sterling. She was just 22. She was a vessel of potential, a girl who breathed music and dreamed of the stage. She should have been a world-class cellist. She should have played the suites of Bach in the Royal Albert Hall, her fingers dancing on the strings, moving an audience to tears. She should have taught students, passing on her passion to a new generation. She should have fallen in love, grown old, and held grandchildren. The music she never got to play is the real tragedy of this story, a silent symphony that still echoes in the hearts of those who know her narrative. When the wind blows through the bare branches of that ancient oak tree in Holland Park, stripping the last leaves of autumn, some say you can almost hear the ghost of a cello suite, a melancholic, beautiful sound that defies the silence of the grave. The sterling echo has touched the artistic soul of the city in ways that Penhaligon could never have predicted. A bench was dedicated to her, not far from where her body was found, bearing a simple, devastating inscription, "For Claire and the music that never ends." Musicians, drawn by the gravity of the story, often come to the park to practice near that spot. It has become a spontaneous, uncoordinated tradition, a vigil of sound. On any given Sunday, you might hear the weeping of a violin, the deep hum of a cello, or the breathy whisper of a flute drifting through the trees. The park is alive with the art that Penhaligon tried to extinguish. It is the ultimate act of defiance. The killer tried to create a stillness, a void of perfection where he was the only god. The city responded by filling that void with life, with noise, with the messy, beautiful, chaotic continuity of human expression. He took her life, but he could not take her song. As we stand in the present day, looking back at the long, twisting road of this investigation, we are left with a profound, quiet sense of humility. We realize that we are not the masters of the past. We are merely its custodians. The truth is not something we create. It is something we uncover. It was always there, waiting in the dark, waiting in the silver, waiting in the blood. The London of 1975 is gone, swallowed by the relentless march of time, but its lessons remain sharp and urgent. We have learned that there is no statute of limitations on grief, and there is no expiration date on the truth. The digital age has given us the flashlight, but it is up to us to have the courage to shine it into the darkest corners of our history. The legacy of this case is not just in the past, it is in the future. It is in the new laws being written to protect the privacy of the innocent while hunting the guilty. It is in the new databases being built, the new algorithms being coded, and the new skepticism being applied to the powerful. It has changed the cultural DNA of London. We now know that the 7-minute gap exists in every life, that small, fragile window of vulnerability where anything can happen. But we also know that the gap can be closed. We know that 50 years is a long time, but it is not forever. We know that the truth is patient, more patient than any killer, more patient than any lie, more patient than the fog itself. And so, the file on Claire Sterling gathers dust once more in the archives of Scotland Yard. But this time, it is the dust of peace, not neglect. It is the dust of a job finished. The silver lion cufflink sits in its glass case in the Black Museum, a tamed beast, a shiny trinket that lost its power the moment the truth was spoken. The manor house in Kent is gone, the earth salted and turned over. The name Arthur Penhaligon is spoken only as a warning to those who think they are untouchable. But if you listen closely to the city, to the deep, rhythmic hum of the traffic and the rustle of the leaves in the park, you can hear the faint, persistent resonance of a life that mattered. Claire Sterling was here. She lived. She walked these streets. She bought milk. She played music. She died. And 50 years later, against all odds, against the weight of wealth and power and time, she won. Her voice, silenced by a blade in the mist, was amplified by the unrelenting march of science until it became a roar that brought down a giant. That is the final, haunting melody of the London 1975 cold case. The fog has lifted. The silence is broken. The pillar has crumbled into dust. And the truth, finally, stands alone, stark and undeniable, in the unforgiving light of the morning.